the biggest obstacle to mass adoption is lack of education. So what can we do to basically onboard more people into the space? And that's by making it fun and making it accessible. So that's exactly what we did. But yeah, more voice of the people. And I think that's part of the reason I really got into it as well. Like I saw it as like this anarchic movement, and that really appealed to me, that we're sort of rebelling against what is and creating something better. So I always sort of say, if I, an ex-theater person, can get into Web3, anybody can. Literally anybody can.
Welcome to Blockchain Beyond the Hype, the podcast that cuts through the noise to deliver practical insights into how blockchain is transforming industries today. Brought to you by Kumo, a blockchain partner that is dedicated to bridging the gap between existing infrastructure and launching real-life blockchain solutions. Together, we'll explore what's possible for the future and take a look at industries where blockchain can have the biggest impact, from travel and hospitality to real estate, renewable energy, and even diamonds. Join us as we uncover the way blockchain is disrupting industries beyond the hype. Hey, Kaitlin, thanks so much for joining me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation to learn more about Crypto Mondays and the community you're building in London through meetups and other initiatives. But I'm also really curious to learn about your personal journey into crypto and blockchain, how you got started, what kept you interested, and how you've seen the community evolve over time. And in this conversation, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on where adoption is growing, what themes are resonating, and of course, what barriers we still have to address to grow and strengthen the community. So to start our convo, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Crypto Mondays London and what it's all about.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, Janna, by the way. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our chat as well. So Crypto Mondays London started back in 2018. Essentially, at that time, I was working for a company that was doing an ICO. So for those who remember back in those Wild West times, I traveled to New York to pitch on Wall Street, which was a huge mistake, but that's another story. And so while I was in New York, I was just sort of looking online to see what sort of meetups and crypto, communities existed so that I could go and get to know people and talk about the company. And I saw, an advert or something for Crypto Mondays. And so I went, and it ended up being their, I think, second ever Crypto Mondays. And it was their biggest one. And there was news cameras there. I mean, there were hundreds of people there. It was huge. And I ended up chatting to the two founders, Lou Kerner and James Haft, and they said, why don't you start one in London? And without thinking too much about it, I just said yes, very dismissively, came back to London and started putting on these, at that point it was weekly, that didn't last very long, monthly meetups. And so that's sort of how it began. Really tiny, me and about 3 Bitcoin bros sitting around talking about Bitcoin. And that was sort of the origin story of Crypto Mondays London.
And what does it look like now? Because as I understand, each kind of location of Crypto Mondays has its autonomy. And so what's your current focus for the London chapter, and what kind of themes are you prioritizing today? Because today is very different to back in those old days, no?
Yeah, so it is truly, so I always say it's a truly decentralized global organization. So every city is run slightly differently. And that's done with the intent of who knows your culture in your city better than you who live there, right? So in London, I am American, but I've been living in London for almost 20 years. And so I discovered pretty quickly that the initial idea with Crypto Mondays was sort of looking at a conference and saying, what's the best part of a conference? What's the most fun bit? Usually it's the networking. So what if we took just that and created a meetup that was just networking? And so initially that's what we did. And I think that worked for a little while, but ultimately I think people want value. They want more than that. They want more than just a beer and a chat. And so we discovered pretty quickly that the best way to do that would be to provide some sort of content, some sort of educational content. And then I really began to look at this kind of ethos of the biggest obstacle to mass adoption is lack of education. So what can we do to basically onboard more people into the space. And that's by making it fun and making it accessible. So that's exactly what we did. So we have kept it free all of these years. And that's why we use a sort of sponsorship business model. But it was this idea that we would bookend our educational content with networking. So you come in, you have a couple drinks, you get to know everybody, you sit down, you learn something, and then you go back to networking and you can kind of discuss what you've just learned. And it's also sort of a bonding experience. And I think that's why we've managed to create this really quite extraordinary community, because London is a big city. And I hear a lot of people talk about the London crypto scene and they say different things. It's fractured or it's small or it's not, um, you know, choose your criticism. But I think actually the people who show up and show out, like there is a lot of close-knit business being done. So I don't know, but I think in terms of our topics that we choose, we tend to listen to the community. I always sort of say the community is our guiding star. And if you listen to the community and you think about them first and foremost, always wanting to give back to the community, I think you really can't go wrong. So when it comes to what topics we choose, sometimes it's current events. And then other times it's very much dictated by the community. So for example, we covered TGE marketing maybe 2 months ago. That absolutely came from the community. There's a lot of companies that were doing TGEs. They wanted to try and understand the best way to engage with tokenomics experts and the best way to market what they were doing. And so that was how we came up with that topic. Last month we did agentic AI. Obviously, AI is everywhere. It's quite the buzzword at the moment. So yeah, again, that came from requests from the community. So that's sort of how we choose. Last night was our May event and we did Bitcoin, and that was sort of based off of Bitcoin Pizza Day being in a few days time. So it really depends, but very much we try to listen to the community.
Okay. And what does, because this is often what I think about. This is what we're trying to do with our podcast too, is to kind of talk about more real life applications and to move beyond the kind of the terminology that you really have to go into and like Google what it's all about if you're an outsider. Um, how do you balance the education for people that are already into the space and the ecosystem and they're demanding maybe particular topics versus the education for complete outsiders who are looking to get more familiar with the crypto and the blockchain space?
It's a great question, and it is a tricky balance. So we tend to be, I sort of call us the gateway drug for people getting into Web3, because we tend to scoop all the newbies. And I don't know if that's because we have quite a large following on Meetup, and Meetup is a little bit more kind of Web2. I'm not sure, but it is a tough one because we have about 30% of our, according to our surveys, 30% of our audience is brand new every time. So we very much try to cater to them as well as all the sort of intermediate level attendees that we have. So for example, last night for Bitcoin, we did a 10-minute keynote that was sort of Bitcoin past, present, and future. And we talked about the origin story and where Bitcoin came from, why it's considered, the original, the beginning of it all. And then we went into a panel where we did talk a little bit more, as I say, at like an intermediate level, but you got to cover the foundational side. So we do try and hit both, but it's a difficult balancing act because you don't want to put off your newbies. You want them to feel welcome and you want them to feel like there's no dumb questions. They can ask anything. But yeah, then you have that other kind of 70% of our audience that are definitely, medium level or in some cases even expert level knowledge. So you want to make sure that they are also being catered to some extent. So we do our best, but it is a little bit of a balancing act for sure.
I mean, yeah, maybe it's specific events for the specific audience. We're trying to toy around with that too, like different content for different levels of knowledge.
Of course. Yeah, it's really difficult because you want to bring the new people in, because I really do feel, for me personally, my background where I came from, this was a huge revelation for me in terms of opportunity and potential, this industry. And I really wanted to convey and impart that feeling of enthusiasm and excitement and opportunity to new audiences. And so I think that's why we sort of have the like informal beer drinking networking side of things, but then also the education part so that people can, because I do think it's one of those industries where you do need a certain level of knowledge to engage. You can engage with zero knowledge. There are wallets and things you can do that are pretty intuitive, pretty user friendly, but the vast majority of it, I think it's still very high risk. And so you just, especially if you want to get into the trading side of things, I do think you need at least a little bit of a basic understanding of what you're doing.
Do you find it, because we've now mentioned Web3, we've mentioned blockchain, we've mentioned crypto, and I guess by its name itself, Crypto Mondays kind of leans toward the crypto side, but do you find it important to distinguish between the three, and like, do you build separate communities around that, or like how do you
I
approach?
mean, yeah, it's a funny one because when we first started, crypto was the catch-all term. Crypto encompassed everything, the blockchain
Yeah.
technology, the tokens, Bitcoin, that was the catch-all term. Now Web3 is sort of the catch-all term. And so when people ask me what is Web3, that's normally what I say. The easiest explanation is that it's a catch-all term for everything that falls underneath that umbrella. If you want to be very specific, I think you can break it down like Web 1, 2, and 3. Um, really boiling it down to like the ownership of what you're doing and what you're building, who owns it. So I think that's how I think of Web3. And I have been asked to define it previously because it does get thrown around so frequently. But yeah, I think crypto now it has a different definition, and I would imagine that that will evolve going forward as well. And then Web3 will become sort of obsolete, and we'll use something else. But it's the lexicon or like the terminology I do try to avoid it somewhat, especially at the meetings. Even yesterday, somebody was talking about wrapped Bitcoin, and I interrupted, and I'm like, I don't think our audience, I don't think the majority of people know what a wrapped Bitcoin is. Can you stop and explain what that is? 'Cause we just start, we're so in our world, and we start to use these words without really thinking if people can understand what we're talking about. So yeah, it's a really good point.
Or if different people are
The same
talking
thing.
about the same thing when they're using the
Exactly.
same term, right? Like Web3 can be so everything, or, crypto is not synonymous with blockchain. And then sometimes, yeah, we also find or for us, where Kumo is a blockchain enterprise platform, but we are not a crypto platform. So that's not one of our use cases. So to explain that with our customers that are more from the traditional side, we also find a lot of times that we have to explain the terminologies before we go into the application of. Maybe we pivot a little bit to your journey of how you got into the space. So you mentioned you went to New York for an ICO, but what got you interested in crypto and blockchain in the first place?
I actually love this question because I think when you have these kind of newer industries, it's really fascinating what people's backgrounds are because up until very recently, you don't really you didn't get a degree in blockchain or AI or any of that.
Mm.
Now you can, but yeah, so in 2017, I'm a former theater director. So I come from the theater world. So I had a theater company in London for about 13 years and I directed theater shows. It was a feminist theater company, so we really focused on stories from sort of the female viewpoint or following a female narrative. So that was my what I was fully focused on until about 2017. And a really good friend of mine from uni, he was kind of like the IT guy. He was our IT housemate. Approached me and said, "I've got this idea for a company. I want to build it on the blockchain, and I want you to come work with me." And of course, I was like, that's hilarious. What are you talking about? I know nothing about tech. I'm a theater girl. And at the end of the day, what he really wanted was me to come and be the front facing person because he wanted to sit in the back and code. He didn't want anything to do with talking about it or presenting. And I think in
Okay.
his mind, he was like, "You're a theater. You can do this." And I was very reluctant. And he said, "Listen, I'll give you a week. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. I'll give you a week. Go away and think about it and then come back." And so I did. I went away and did the whole deep dive rabbit hole, TED Talk, YouTube, and I was just really blown away by I found it very exciting, which was weird for a non-tech person, but just how much opportunity was there. And that I felt like I was getting in on something from the beginning. Because I think when you think about the Silicon Valley.com, generationally, we kind of missed that, I think, not anybody's fault. It was just when I was born and what I was doing. But for this, we're still all early adopters. And so I think that was really exciting to me too to feel like I hadn't missed the boat and that I could get in there. And so yeah, I came back and I quit my job and I left the theater and I said, "Let's do it." And so that was that.
And so what has your experience been so far? Specifically interested to hear from your perspective as a non-tech person, because I think also often we think, or there might be a misconception that you need to be technical to be involved in blockchain, crypto, Web3.
I thought that too, and it really intimidated me. In fact, it almost made me not wanna get involved at all, but I just sort of jumped right in, and I thought the "fake it till you make it," phrase really applies here because I would be going to conferences and talking to people and have really no idea what I was talking about. But yeah, I just the more you sort of surround yourself with it, I think through osmosis even, you just start to pick things up and you start to learn, and so I did, and then during lockdown, Consensus was doing a boot camp, like a smart contract coding boot camp. And they were offering it for free just because it was COVID and people were home. And I remember signing up to that and getting into it. And I didn't complete it because then all of the restrictions lifted and people went back to work. But for, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks, I took this course and that really got into the technical level of things, and of coding. And I'm really glad I did it. I was horrible at it, but it gave me a more granular understanding of kind of what blockchain is and what we're doing. But I still am non-technical. And I say it very openly because I want people to understand that you can get involved and that you can benefit greatly from this industry without the technical knowledge. So I always sort of say, if I, an ex-theater person, can get into Web3, anybody can. Literally anybody can. So I hope that it's an encouraging thing. Imposter syndrome is real, right? I think especially for women, and it can feel that way even now. I went to an AI event in Dubai during Token 2049 that was very technical, and a lot of the people I was sort of chatting to after the panel, I was out of my depth. But then you listen, you ask questions. I think it's just sort of not feeling so intimidated that you can't ask questions.
Yeah. What I find, I'm also not from a technical background, and what I or start to see more and more is that, I mean, any business or any field needs a range of people. You need the technical people, you need commercial people. Probably why your friend was looking for you, because you could be the face of this particular project, without needing to build the actual project. So yeah, it would probably also often when I talk to people who want to get involved but don't have the technical background, I just say find your value in the chain and then hone in on that. No one is asking you to become a smart contract developer,
Developer,
right?
exactly, and that is fantastic advice, great advice because you're right, you've got marketers, you've got writers, you've got all kinds of the creative side of things. I mean, obviously, I do events, and I always sort of say, if you can direct a theater show, you can absolutely do an event, and so, I mean, there isn't a ton of technical knowledge needed for events, and I just think, yeah, you're absolutely right, you don't have to have that level of knowledge just to be involved.
And I mean, to participate as a consumer, I guess I would say, is becoming so much easier. Between now and a couple of years ago, it's so easy to create. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because you can participate so easily without maybe
Yeah.
understanding what you're buying or what you're trading. Um, but maybe that's a separate conversation. But at least to
Yeah.
participate becomes easier, and the barriers of entry are much lower. I remember when I first tried to create a MetaMask wallet, and I was like, "Wow, where am I? What am I doing?"
And even then, speaking of MetaMask, I lost my seed phrase, like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. It's like the number one thing that you tell people not to do, and I did it, and so, yeah, you're right.
It's one of those things is like, "Yeah, I'm gonna save
Oh,
it in
I'll
a place
never
I'll
lose.
never forget." And then it's such a good place that
I'm
you'll
sure it's
forget.
somewhere. I just like to think it's somewhere. I'll find it someday.
When we, first connected last week, we talked a little bit about our experience at Token 2049. And one of the topics I was really excited to talk to you about was access and representation in this space. You also mentioned, coming in not only as a non-tech
Yeah.
person, but as a woman, coming into a heavily male dominated space. I think that for me and for you stood out heavily still at Token, is that and particularly on stage, it was all men, and it felt like such an obvious example that we still have so far to come in terms of inclusion. So, can you share a bit about your own experience as a woman in this industry, and also how that's affecting how you approach Crypto Mondays?
For sure. So I love this topic actually because I think it's really important, and I think things are better. Things have evolved to be better than when I very first began in 2017, 2018. There are much more women involved now, and there are more women being spotlighted, and there are more women in higher ranking positions, because I think representation is very important. I was disappointed to see so many all male speaking lineups in Dubai, and it does happen occasionally. I'll come from Paris where it's fantastic and you don't have that hardly at all. And then you'll go to another event and you'll kind of see like, okay, this is still an issue. And I really don't think it's because there aren't women who can speak on this topic. There absolutely are. But how hard are the organizers trying to source them and to engage with them? That I don't know. I do feel a sense of responsibility as a founder and a CEO in the space as a female to do certain things. Like, you will never see an all-male panel at Crypto Mondays London, never. I don't think we've ever had one. I just think there are subject matter experts of every gender for every topic. So I just think it's nonsense to not spotlight women on a panel or have women speakers. I also engage with a lot of female-led initiatives. I think that's really important too. Crypto Mondays is not specifically female-led, but you do have things like the Bigger Pie, Women in Blockchain Talks. These are, London-based organizations that we engage with and partner with so that we can help highlight the work that they're doing because they are doing it very specifically for gender, and I think that's important. So things like that. And then also, whenever I can, of course, hiring women. So we have quite a lot of women on the Crypto Mondays London team. And so I think those are the three main things that I try to do in my position at Crypto Mondays London. And then also holding other people accountable. I work with a lot of male led companies. And if they're putting together an event, I will be the first to say, like, why are there no women on this panel? Or, to ask questions. I think
Mm.
accountability is very important because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the people having these conversations are women. I go to so many events where there's a panel like women in tech, and that's getting better too. But I think that we need our male allies. We need men to be having these conversations, not women. So I think we're doing our part, but we need our allies to do their part too. So I get asked this question a lot, and it's usually by women, and I wonder, are the guys getting asked this too? Because I hope they are.
And is this because you spoke quite a bit about education and that your events are education focused. Are you also looking specifically about educating particular demographics?
Crypto Mondays, our whole thing is all about accessibility. That's why it will always be free. The barriers to entry are really low, if non-existent. Um, but we do not actively seek out just women. I personally do, in the sense that I'm always trying to encourage more women to attend the events. It's my dream to have like a really 50-50 split audience. We are not there. We are at about like, I'd say probably 35% women, which isn't horrible, but it's pretty low. And I do think there are some factors that play into it. I think representation, as I said, is part of it, but also this I feel of intimidation. And that's why it was really important to me to create a safe space, where there is no one's going to mock you for your questions. No one's going to make you feel unwelcome. That's just not allowed in my community. I won't have it.
We've come a long way-ish, but we still got a long way to go. So we're talking a lot about education in this space and accessibility and understanding the ecosystem. What are some of the misconceptions that you find yourself addressing over and over again to the newcomers in the industry because you meet so many newcomers every time at your events?
So I will say that by the time someone has come around to attending a Crypto Mondays, I think they're kind of past the crypto is a scam mentality. I think they've moved past that or they probably wouldn't be there. Um, However, in my day-to-day life, and I'm sure this is something a lot of people who work in our industry share, when you are trying to explain to someone what you do or the industry that you work in, that's when I hear a lot of the, crypto is a scam, it's not real money, it's so that's a lot of the pushback. And then obviously what makes headlines, Sam Bankman-Fried, like that's what your mainstream media is reporting on. They're not reporting on, how World Mobile has brought infrastructure to African cities with no internet. Like you don't hear about that. That's the boring stuff. So I think kind of combating this idea of crypto as a scam is probably the biggest one that I get from non industry people. I just was home in the States visiting family. Oh, and I got that a lot. And they wanted me to explain to them about the magic internet money. And so, that's I spend a fair amount of time trying to get them to understand like there is no backing anymore. Like we used to back our fiat with gold. We don't anymore. So your credit card is just as much a magical internet money as Bitcoin. And so that's kind of the jumping off point that I usually use to try to explain.
I suppose you see quite a lot of blockchain, Web3, crypto projects. Can you give an example of maybe a project that you came across recently that you thought delivered real value to the community? Maybe if you have an example of not a crypto project but a blockchain project that goes beyond crypto.
I mean, I know I just mentioned World Mobile, but I think that's a great one just in terms of like blockchain for good. I know there's one called, I think it was called AgriLedger, and that was, as the name would suggest, basically like tracking where your food comes from, ensuring that farmers are paid, fair prices, and that is very much a ledger based, a blockchain based project. There's no token involved. So those are some ones off the top of my head. I mean, I think if you're looking at sort of the bigger named things, like earlier we were talking about women-led projects and things like that, I was thinking about like Bearer Baddies. Like Barachain as an ecosystem is pretty impressive, everything that they've done. And their technology, I think, is really fascinating. And then you have this sort of offshoot of this entire community of Bear Baddies where they are focused on like female projects. And you get a real sense of community kind of for women in our space, which just doesn't really happen. Even something as small as I remember thinking, I think it was Denver earlier this year. They had all this merch that was specific to women. And I was just thinking, yeah, it's such a small thing and it's just merch and I get that, but it's specific for women. You've got cute crop tops and you've got bags and like things that women would actually use instead of t-shirts and caps and hoodies that are very much, maybe like unisex, but very much geared towards men, I think. And so even something like that, I think is quite incredible what's being built out. And things like that just didn't exist, 3, 4 years ago. So I think we are headed in that direction. And I think that's really positive. But just off the top of my head, like those are some projects I think that are doing a lot of good and that are really focused on ensuring that there is this kind of diversity in the space.
Is your community, because you also mentioned that your community demands a lot of the topics which are discussed at Crypto Mondays. Do you see a change in the community also that they want to talk about more projects or space that has utility and like value rather than just speculative value?
Absolutely. I will say, I maintain, anytime we do a topic that the end result is earning money, so whether that's trading, usually it's trading, Bitcoin is another big one. Those tend to be our busiest events, and I think let us not underestimate the power of greed because I think a lot of people come into this space because they want to make money. They see it as lucrative. They see when Lambo they want to get in on that. But I definitely think it also runs in cycles, right? So you have what I call sort of like hype. I know we're beyond the hype here, but you kind of have these hype topics. So if I think back, like even last year, you had sort of DePIN and RWA. Now, look, those of us in the industry know RWA is not a new concept. That's more or less what we've been talking about all this time. But now we've put a name to it, and now people are really into it, and now they're looking at things like real estate and those applications were always there, but now we're talking, and DePIN is another one. So you're kind of digging into the infrastructure of things, which is maybe not the sexiest topic, but is super important. And so those kind of flared up. And then if you look at like the NFT hype of 2021, area, like we know NFTs aren't going anywhere. They're it's a contract. We use them all the time. But the art side of things, like that was a big hype. I think last year also
Yeah.
metaverse was like a big, oh my, we have to build in the metaverse. What's going on in the metaverse? And now no one's people still use the metaverse, but we don't talk about it in the same way. And now, of course, we're on to AI. So everything is AI. And do we need AI in every single project that we have, or are we utilizing it correctly? And what is the convergence there with Web3? And so it does sort of roll like this, I think, where you have these flare ups of like real interest in a topic, and then it kind of dies down. But always maintaining that status quo is anything that will make people money. So I think that's the big draw in the first instance.
Such an interesting position that you're in, no? Because you have to create or hold events to attract a community that is, I think, very, very active. But then, and this is also again like going to the paradox of like accessibility or inclusivity, or like this whole community is meant to be super accessible, but there's really two sides. Like there's the ones that are like hyper in it to win it and want to make money, and then there's the ones that don't believe in it at all, and then there's the ones that like, okay, we only want to build for utility and we don't care about the super hype. And it seems like there's three, and I guess you have to cater to all three.
Yeah, we try to cover it all. I sort of think about, obviously, as I say, we do listen to the community, but I also think about like, what do I want to learn about? I've been in this space a little while. What is fascinating to me? What topics do I feel like I don't have enough information about? Like DeSci is one that to me is, it's not new necessarily, but this is again like the hype words as they go. So DeSci, and everybody wants to talk about DeSci, and I feel like I don't know very much about that.
For those that don't know, what does DSci stand for?
So decentralized, it's like decentralized science, I think, right? And so, yeah, and
Signs,
I don't
okay.
know. So that's why I feel like that's a topic that I need to learn about. So maybe that's something that we need to cover. So yeah, I mean, and then some topics we recycle them. And then some topics I always revisit because I think they're super important. And I think, for example, privacy and security is a huge one. Huge one. I think people are so it's not, again, it's not like the sexiest, most fascinating topic, and so people sort of dismiss it. And I think ultimately a lot of what we do in the Web3 space, I see as like it's a revolution. It's a move of anarchy, right? Like we're saying we don't need these intermediaries. We don't need this system isn't working the way that it was built. Let's disrupt it. Let's do something different. And so I think that sort of comes like full circle with certain topics or things that we want to learn about. It's for me like, how can we disrupt the status quo? And so I want to learn about those things. And so yeah, so that's kind of like DeSci just being one example, because I don't know what it is. So I need to do an event about it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And I spoke with someone from
Hmm.
Timons last week, which is a platform that tokenizes diamonds. And there we just had the observation that, yeah, at some point, blockchain technology will just become an underlying technology, and we won't talk about it anymore, but we'll just talk about the use cases on top of that. So maybe the DeSci or the following D will just be, you might use blockchain in multiple and across different industries in science, in medicine, in whatever whatnot.
And I think you're right. And I think we are there to some extent, because something else I'll tell people when they're coming at me super hard about it being, magic internet money and nonsense. And I'll say, your bank is probably already using blockchain. You just don't know it. Like a lot of
Yeah.
companies now are using blockchain, and we just don't, we're not aware of it because as a consumer, we don't have direct access to it. And I do think as the user experience improves, because that is a huge point of contention in our industry, is the lack of intuitive user experience. So I do think once that improves, that will make
Yeah.
things easier too. But how much of what you're doing do you want to just be ignorant about, I guess, is the question too. Like, we use the internet every day. I don't know how the internet works. I couldn't explain it to you. And so I think you're right in the sense that blockchain will become like this, but I do think there is power in knowledge, and I do think there is power in having at least a kind of basic understanding of what you're doing. And I think in particular when you're dealing with money and you're moving money around and you're using wallets and you're investing your money in tokens, to understand, how the system works at least a little bit. I That's just my personal belief. And so that's why I think the education part is so paramount.
But yeah, to your point, there's power in knowledge, and the more people that understand it, I think the more we also move away from that, because I see at least a trend in marketing and in comms where for a while we were saying, and even for ourselves, we were looking at, okay, do we change this? Okay, a blockchain powered platform, and this like a blockchain based, da 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 da. Actually, often it doesn't matter what you're selling. It's just a platform that enables you to be more efficient and, maybe interoperability or the different values that it brings, but not that it's blockchain powered. But still, we have to kind of say that it's blockchain powered because we're not fully there yet.
But I also think that it's worth mentioning that one of the most exciting things I think about this new iteration of the internet and what we're building in sort of Web3 is the sense of contribution. You are not just a passive user in this industry. You are encouraged to contribute and to have a reputation, to be a good actor in the space, all these kind of phrases that we use. And so I think let us not forget that like we are encouraged to participate and that it's the contribution more broadly that makes it so strong in terms of security. So the more people that you have utilizing, running nodes, whatever, the more safe and the better it is. So I think there's also that side of it, which I think we didn't have previously. You had a handful of people who created a website and we came on and we used it. Okay, fine. That was kind of the end of it. Now it's like the next level of that. And I think that's, important to mention as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And specifically, I guess when I feel like younger generations or even our generation, we're a bit disillusioned with the current systems and we feel like we have no participation or our participation doesn't matter. Um, yeah, so then by including people within systems, organizations, companies,
Yeah, more
projects.
voice of the people, and I think that's part of the reason I really got into it as well. Like, I saw it as, like, this anarchic movement, and that really appealed to me, that we're sort of rebelling against what is and creating something better, And by creating something better, we have more inclusivity, I would hope, and more engagement from just the average person. So it's not just like a few elite people running something. It's not a single point of failure. It's not a centralized system. And so I think that was to me in my first coming into the space, that was the most exciting thing to me. And so I think we have to be careful not to lose sight of that. The more that we engage with these bigger institutions, and that is necessary, I think, for this kind of mass adoption that we talk about. But also not to lose sight of like what made somebody create Bitcoin in the first place.
To round this up, though, for someone, because we talked about this, that some people feel like they don't belong or they might be a newcomer in this space. What's one thing that they can do today to kind of jump into the space or to feel like they can start to belong?
I mean, I am a big proponent of IRL, and it's not just because I run an IRL community, but I really do think getting out and meeting like-minded people and having those conversations, yes, you have to overcome a bit of shyness, I suppose. And there are some real introverts who I would then say, obviously, there's tons of resources available online, but I think if you can work up the courage to go out, and find a community like Crypto Mondays or whatever happens to be in your city, and just show up. You don't even have to talk to anybody, but just show up because I think you can learn a lot just by being there. I always sort of say by osmosis, but I really think just being around these conversations and listening can be so useful and so eye-opening. So I would really recommend that people get out of the house and go out among the people and find your tribe in whatever aspect of the industry you're interested in. Find that. If it's art, it's out there. If it's music, it's out there. If it's blockchain for good, it's out there. Whatever it might be, and find it.
Very, very good recommendation. If people are looking to find you online and to learn more about Crypto Mondays London, where should they go?
We are everywhere. So Crypto Mondays London, we're on LinkedIn, we have a Telegram group, we have a Discord, we have a meetup, we have about 11,000 members across our platform. So you can really find us anywhere. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. And if you're interested in attending our events, we do have a Luma calendar that you can subscribe to. And of course, we live stream everything. So even if you are not in London, but you're interested in a particular topic, our YouTube live streams are always there. And we do try and engage with our live stream audience too. So if you have a question, we will read it out. I mean, yeah. So those are all the various places. And I'm out there, but look for Crypto Mondays. It's all about the community, I think.
Thank you so much, Kaitlin. I hope that I can join one day. If not, I'll come on the live stream.
Yes, I would love that. Yes, come to London.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Janna. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Blockchain Beyond the Hype. exploring how to harness blockchain technology to transform the way we do business. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please subscribe, leave a review, and share with other people who are passionate about creating change. Until next time, keep innovating and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.